Hello and welcome to the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me via Skype is Ralph Valenti for unbiased conversations in AEW, WWE, NXT, and New Japan Pro Wrestling. Subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. So Ralph, after the little delay thanks to the Thanksgiving weekend, the ratings finally came out for Wednesday night, and they're not good, especially for AEW Dynamite, Ralph. AEW Dynamite got a 0.26 rating last week with 663,000 total viewers, both their lowest numbers since AEW premiered on October 2nd. NXT got a 0.24 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic with 810,000 viewers for the second week in a row, beating AEW in total viewership. Should AEW start being concerned about these numbers?
I definitely think there's a few things that AEW should be a little concerned about. One, obviously, looking at the total views. As you mentioned, it was a little over 600,000 viewers in comparison to from their very first show, which was over 1 million viewers. So that's a little alarming just because of the simple fact that the numbers would or some could indicate the numbers could indicate that they aren't necessarily retaining their audience. Now, given one of the things that I know you're going to touch on is the fact that this episode did come out during the week of Thanksgiving. So I didn't necessarily anticipate them to have, stellar numbers to put up like, their best show to date. I know that a lot of people were talking about this show being one of the worst episodes of Dynamite to date, since their last, or their first 9 episodes, however many it's been. I think that it's important to keep everything in context when talking about Dynamite because they have had a really good show week in and week out. And even though this may not have been their very best show, it's not like it was necessarily a bad show.
No, not at all.
You could certainly watch episodes of Raw and SmackDown and say, those were really bad shows. This may not have been their best show, but I certainly don't think it was a bad show by any standard, by any means. So yeah, I think it should be a little concerning that they aren't necessarily retaining the audience. But again, it was during a holiday week, so I didn't necessarily anticipate them putting up, great
Now,
numbers.
if you compare their viewership between week 1 and this past week, where yes, week 1 got 1.4 million viewers, and this past week got 663,000. Yes, that means they are dropping their total viewership significantly. 800,000 viewers, which is a lot. But you have to look at this more from let's take the highest number out and the lowest number out. And I did that. I looked at all the ratings, all the viewerships between week 1 and week 9, Ralph. And I got to be honest with you, they've been fairly consistent between the mid 3.0s and the mid 0.4s in the 18 to 49 demographic for a rating. And their viewership, the lowest was 759,000. That was the October 30th episode where they were competing with Game 7 of the World Series. And, there was week 2 and week 3 where they were over 1 million. But after that, they were between 750 and 950,000 viewers. So they've been fairly consistent throughout this whole 2 months. And NXT, on the other hand, they've been kind of slowly climbing in their viewership, starting with, 580,000 on that October 30th show. And here they are at 810,000 this past week. So, where are these viewers coming from is really the question. And a lot of people are saying it's the 50 plus demo, which the ratings are showing that, but is it really that big of a swing from the 50 plus demo?
So when you're looking at the total viewership and looking at the numbers, especially when you talk about NXT, there's a few things you can certainly point to. One, I think you can certainly point to the fact that the Survivor Series definitely highlighted the NXT talent. They've been trying to push the NXT talent on Raw and SmackDown, highlighting those guys. Giving guys like Adam Cole the opportunity to be highlighted with wins over the likes of a Daniel Bryan. So really, that's kind of what you wanted to see. You wanted to see an increase in ratings. You wanted to see an increase in total viewership because that would indicate like a return on investment. You're putting that investment on a guy like Adam Cole, on people like Rhea Ripley, people who have been booked strongly, either on War Games or on Survivor Series or Raw or SmackDown, you would hope that you'd see these numbers increase over the course of the last several weeks or months. And we've certainly seen that. The other thing that I think NXT has done a really good job of is promoting or creating good content from beginning to end. And that what I mean by that is building off. The shows are really kind of building off one another week after week. So you look at some of the things they've done. Rhea Ripley, while she's definitely kind of maybe at her peak right now or at the top of her game, she's one of the individuals that's certainly being highlighted on NXT. Before she was really one of the focal points of NXT, she was really kind of only focused on NXT UK. So they've really done a good job of building her up. And then really kind of developing other small, subtle storylines throughout.
Really
so,
building their women's division throughout this whole month too.
Yeah. Yep. So building up that kind of mid card. Dakota Kai is another one that comes to mind with her heel turn. The whole thing with Tegan Knox, that whole dynamic. They've really done a good job of highlighting Leo Rush over the last several weeks and the tension between him and Garza. So they're doing other things and they're not just focusing on like the main event or the main card or the main portion of the program. Yes, you're always going to have to focus around the Undisputed Era and Adam Cole. But when you look at the other parts of the show, whether it be Keith Lee, Matt Riddle, Finn Balor, Tommaso Ciampa, they're doing a good job of building the show around more than just one storyline. I think AEW has done a good job at that, but not quite as good a job as NXT has done. So, for example, they've been focusing mostly around Chris Jericho, the Inner Circle. But I feel like from time to time and week in and week out, sometimes they drop the ball a little bit or lose focus. So a few things that came to mind when I was thinking about this, because I wanted to make sure I was able to give good examples. When Luchasaurus returned, we got a face-off between him and Hager. They didn't really capitalize on that. They didn't really do too much with it. Now, is something going to happen with that further down the line? Maybe.
Good point.
But you would have hoped to see them kind of build on the steam and the momentum that Luchasaurus got when he came back. Darby Allin, his match against Jon Moxley. I don't think we've really seen much from Darby Allin since that match. Again,
he wasn't on last week, so I'm not. I think that was the only show that's happened since that match, and he wasn't on.
And you would think that they would try to build off the momentum of those moments, like try to build week after week. Now, does he have to go out there and have a match? He doesn't necessarily have to have a match, but maybe little video packages, some way to continue to keep guys like that peak interest. So that way, you're not just focusing on Chris Jericho. You're not just focusing on the Inner Circle. There's another reason for people to watch.
Here's part of the problem, though, Ralph, is, like Joey Janela, for example, wasn't on this past episode of Dynamite because he had a date in the independent scene for GCW. I don't know if Darby was also in that same situation where he had an independent date or they just didn't use him. But this is going to happen a lot with AEW because they allow their wrestlers to do other things. So the question is, should they continue to let that flexibility happen, or should they start putting the hammer down and go, listen, we need you on Wednesdays. Stop booking stuff on Wednesdays.
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of them being booked in other promotions because there's other ways to get guys over. Vignettes, video packages, things like that. When you look at some of the stuff they're doing with the Dark Order right now, was I invested in the Dark Order going back a month ago?
No.
Hardly at all. They've been really trying to push them down everybody's throat to a certain extent. And it hasn't necessarily worked. It hasn't clicked. But you look at some of the video packages they've put together. Join the Dark Order. There's a website, Join the Dark Order. I really like the direction they're going with the Dark Order. Now, is it going to work with their fan base? It may not, but at least there's that effort, and at least there's they're trying different avenues or different ways to get them over. You brought up Joey Janela. We know that he had kind of a feud going with a guy named Sean Spears. You haven't really seen too much of that. So, I think that week in and week out, AEW's been putting a good product out there, and they're focusing on 2 or 3 really good storylines, but they're missing out on some of the other storylines that I feel like they could be capitalizing on and building on week after week. And it doesn't have to be where they have wrestling matches. It can be little video packages and promos and vignettes and stuff like that to keep these guys at the forefront of your mind. So I feel like there's a little bit of intrigue that's lost while they're trying to promote guys like Cody, Jericho, Moxley, Omega. Those guys, they're already big names. They don't need to be established. They're already known to their hardcore fan base. They need to start to develop their mid card to lower mid card and get those guys over and clicking. That way they have viable contenders for championships further down the road. And I think that's starting to reflect a little bit in the overall product.
It's true. It's possible. But I mean, they see the overall ratings here, and the next show that we have is a stacked card to many's belief. You have Hikaru Shida versus Chris Statlander, Trent versus Ray Phoenix, Christopher Daniels versus Pentagon, John Moxley versus Joey Janela in a rematch from Fyter Fest, the Young Bucks and Dustin versus Proud and Powerful and Sammy Guevara. Do you think this was always the plan to have a card like this the week after Thanksgiving, or do you think this was reactionary that after such a bad rating, they had to push this card a little bit stronger than they intended?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think, like I said, AEW, they've always put on good shows. So I think that they're trying to meet that standard week in and week out, which is great for the fans because you know you're going to get a good quality product. But this is the good thing about competition. They know that they've lost in the ratings or the viewership 2 weeks in a row now to NXT. Right. You got to think that, especially when you have guys like Jericho and guys like Omega saying like that's developmental. You want to say those things, that's fine. But when they start beating you in the ratings, well, you can't really point to it and say they're developmental anymore if they're beating you in the ratings. Yeah, it's WWE's developmental system. We get that, but it's still a good product, and it's a product that is competing against AEW. So whether it's AEW trying to live up to their standard or NXT forcing them to put out a better product, at the end of the day, the fans are certainly going to win. My biggest concern, like we've talked about week in and week out, is at what point do you start to have the law of diminishing returns come into effect where, you know, you've put on so many good matches on TV where come time for pay-per-view, there's not that many big matches left. You've seen all the big matches. That's be one of my concerns that I would be kind of keeping at the forefront of my mind, especially when you don't necessarily have it where they're focusing on creating new stars just yet for the main event. Right. Scorpio Sky got his opportunity, but they need to start developing new guys, not just your Omegas, your Moxleys, and guys that are already
now,
made.
You brought up earlier the push for War Games and Survivor Series as a possible reason for the boost in viewership, the boost in ratings. You know, that's all gone now. So does NXT keep their consistency? And now that AEW does not have a pay-per-view in the near future because Full Gear is gone, now we get to maybe get a sense of stability for these guys, both these promotions' ratings. So are we going to see a very tight race like we've had the last 2 weeks? Or because there's no Survivor Series and War Games, there's no Full Gear, are we going to see one brand take over like AEW has over the last month and a half over NXT?
I think this is a huge week for both companies. You want to see, if you're NXT, you want to see if, if they can draw those numbers, if they can pull those numbers, not following a big pay-per-view like Survivor Series or like War Games. And if you're AEW, you want to damn sure make sure that if you're going to stack your card like they're trying to stack for this week, you just want to make sure that 600,000+ was just a fluke. It was just a blip. It's nothing to be concerned about, because if they pull those same numbers or the numbers are lower, you know, you're going to start scratching your head and saying, all right, well, what's not going right? Because I can guarantee you, especially on a network, or I'm sorry, a cable station like TNT, they don't want to see numbers continue to drop. They want consistency. They want numbers closer to that 1 million mark and not closer to that 500,000.
It's funny
mark.
Because their projection for the early on was around 400 to 600,000. So they have, crushed those expectations so far. And even at their lowest at 663,000, they've exceeded the expectations so far by TNT. But if they're going to start declining underneath that 600,000, then, it should be a concern. But like I said, you look at everything between October and November, there's really nothing there that saw a real significant drop. If you compare week 1 to week 9, yes, that's a huge drop. But weeks 2 through 8, there's just not enough there for me to think, oh my God, this is the panic button, Ralph. So, no. Our next episode is going to be Thursday, where we review both shows. We talk about the ratings when they come out. So I'll ask you, predicting, what do you think is the total viewership for both shows after this week?
So even though AEW has stacked their card, I feel like it's a card built very much for their current fan base, not really necessarily meant to attract people outside of it. So I'm going to say that they land comfortably around 725,000. I think NXT beats them again this week, and I'm going to say NXT has about 850,000.
Really? Wow. That is quite the prediction. I say AEW gets back to where they were before. I say they get over the 800,000 mark, maybe even 850,000. Like I said, last week, Thanksgiving Eve, it's the second most social night of the year behind New Year's Eve and the most traveled day of the year. So I bet you a lot of people weren't watching. A lot of people probably had it on their DVRs, and that does not go into the ratings numbers. So I say
WWE fans stay home that night then, I guess.
Well, if they're 50 plus, it's got to be. If 50 plus.
True. They're the ones getting ready to bake the turkey while the other people are out partying.
Exactly.
I know I was.
Exactly. So I say AEW gets to 850,000. NXT probably gets a drop because I think their show wasn't as good as, both shows were not that good last week. NXT, I think, gets a slight drop where they get to maybe 725,000. So it would probably be 100,000 viewer difference in favor of AEW would be my guess.
So you have AEW winning this week, and I have NXT, right?
And viewership and rating.
So we shall see.
So NXT has yet to beat them in the 18 to 49 rating, but has won the viewership the last 2 weeks. I think that streak ends this week. So let us know your predictions in viewership and ratings next week in the comments below. Don't forget to share this all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, SCPB Podcast. And for the unbiased conversations in AEW, WWE, NXT, and New Japan Pro Wrestling, subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti, and thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.